All right, let's jump straight into this study. Today we're unpacking a biblical researcher's in-depth summary of some seriously intricate prophetic theories. We are looking at a fascinating framework put together by the channel Barley Harvest. And by the way, you can find a direct link to their original work in the description below. Our focus for this study: a global entity that is supposedly destined to burn in a single hour. It's kind of like a massive theological detective story, and we're going to walk through the evidence step by step. Our roadmap for today has 5 quick stops. First, Mystery Babylon's 4 names. Then, testing historical city candidates, the spirit of Shinar, Zechariah's flying scroll, and finally, the modern prophetic theory. So let's kick things off with Section 1, Mystery Babylon's 4 names. This whole study actually begins with those wild apocalyptic visions in Revelations 17 and 18. They describe this singular, wealth-draining entity that somehow carries 4 completely distinct historical identities: Sodom, Egypt, Jerusalem, and Babylon. But you gotta wonder, how exactly can one entity be 4 places at once? Well, the key is the word mystery. Barley Harvest theorizes this isn't just some poetic flourish from a translator. It's her actual identifier, literally written on her forehead. In the ancient world, this meant her true nature was deliberately hidden. She's wearing a modern disguise, right? Presenting as one thing, but fundamentally being something completely different underneath. And that brings us to why those 4 ancient names matter so much. Rather than viewing them as contradictory spots on a map, the researcher treats them as a composite spiritual profile. Think of it like a giant puzzle. Sodom represents pride and abundance. Egypt, that's a house of bondage. Jerusalem, in this specific context, is a hollowed-out shell of religion. And Babylon represents humanity gathered for its own glory, completely independent of God. Imagine all of those ancient, catastrophic spiritual traits combining and operating inside a single modern city today. Moving right along to Section 2, testing historical city candidates. To figure out this host body, Barley Harvest rigorously tests different historical hypotheses. The first big one: could ancient Jerusalem itself be Mystery Babylon? I mean, it's a totally fair question. Jesus himself pointed out that prophets were slain in Jerusalem. But you have to ask, how could the most transparent, widely named city in all of Scripture possibly fit the requirement of a concealed mystery? Actually, the definitive clue is right there in their destinies. When you put them side by side, it's night and day. Mystery Babylon becomes a permanent haunt for demons thrown down with violence and literally found no more. But Jerusalem's destiny: to be a raised mountain where the Lord dwells forever. A city absolutely cannot be God's eternal dwelling place and a permanently desolate demon haunt at the exact same time. The math just doesn't work. So, if we scratch Jerusalem off the list and briefly move past the Roman Empire, we're looking for a contemporary equivalent. Revelation describes a port city whose sheer appetite for consumption generates wealth for the entire global supply chain. This isn't just a city that sells things. It's a city the whole world sells to. The merchants of the earth get incredibly rich off her. And to put that kind of wealth into perspective, we're talking about roughly $2 trillion of global wealth clearing through a single financial district address. Every single day. That is a staggering number. The wealth of nations is denominated in her currency and settled at her address. It's not scattered globally. It all passes through one very specific, locatable port city. Which brings us to Section 3. The spirit of Shinar. If this entity isn't bound to ancient geography, the study suggests we might be witnessing a migration. The original spirit of Shinar, the ancient kingdom of Babel, moving to a new home. You know, Jesus taught this really profound principle in the Gospels about wandering spirits. A spirit driven out doesn't just evaporate into thin air. It actively seeks a new house, and it brings back 7 spirits worse than itself. The wickedness compounds. But the absolute crucial takeaway here: this spirit needs a literal, physical, concrete city to inhabit. It needs an address. Now for Section 4, Zechariah's flying scroll. To figure out how this city meets its sudden end, Barley Harvest pivots way back, like 500 years before Revelation was even written. We're diving into Zechariah chapter 5, and man, there is a glaring anomaly here. Zechariah says he sees a flying scroll 20 cubits long and 10 cubits wide. If you lay that out flat, you basically have a 30 by 15-foot flying billboard, which obviously completely defies every non-physical rule of ancient scroll making. So how do we make sense of this? Well, the researcher applies an ancient scribal method. If you use the standard royal cubit, which is about 20.6 inches, and you follow the ancient Talmudic rule of reading a scroll's width as its rolled circumference, the whole picture changes. Suddenly, you can calculate the object's actual three-dimensional proportions exactly the way a Hebrew scribe would have pictured it. And the results are wild. Those meticulously recorded dimensions give us a cylinder that is 35 feet in length and 5.5 feet in diameter. That perfectly matches the size and proportions of a modern medium-range ballistic missile. Just imagine that visual parallel for a second. A flying cylinder of those exact dimensions entering a house and instantly consuming its timber and stones. And that leads us to our final stop, Section 5, the modern prophetic theory. If the first vision was the weapon, Zechariah's second vision details the terrifying payload inside it. He sees a woman named Wickedness in a basket. But here's the kicker. Barley Harvest points out this brilliant linguistic double meaning. In Hebrew, the consonants for women and fire offering are exactly the same. The theory suggests God embedded a fiery destiny right into the letters of her name. She is wickedness destined to literally become a burnt offering. The text then maps out this apocalyptic transport sequence. She's sealed heavily under a lead cover, flown rapidly on the wind, and placed securely on a base in a new house to wait. Now, let's talk about that lead cover for a second. Lead is essentially dead weight. It is practically useless for flying. But you know what it is absolutely essential for? Shielding deadly modern radiation. Tying all these ancient clues to our modern financial capital, the researcher brings up a mind-blowing numeric parallel. Consider the 110-year lifespans of biblical pillars Joseph and Joshua, and compare that to the two massive architectural pillars that once stood in a modern financial port city, each one exactly 110 stories tall. It powerfully evokes the biblical imagery of Samson, pushing apart two pillars and bringing a proud house straight down into its own footprints. The source suggests these events weren't random. They happened on the very ground of modern Mystery Babylon. The migrating spirit compounded, built its house, and the historical markers are eerily aligning with the prophetic text. Having walked through this whole detective story, we have to ask, are we literally looking at the ancient spirit of Shinar sitting under lead in a modern port city, just waiting for its final one-hour fulfillment? It's a heavy, fascinating study of scriptural dimensions and modern geopolitics. So what do you think Mystery Babylon is? I highly encourage you to check out the link in the description to explore Barley Harvest source material for yourself. Thanks for joining us for this in-depth summary.